Okay, hello everyone. It is 1 o'clock and we are going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. My name is Jessica Enix and I'm with the ACIL staff. I would like to welcome you to today's ACIL webinar, Competency Management for Employee and Enterprise Success. Before we begin, I'd like to review a few points of protocol so that you will get the most out of your webinar experience. Remember, you are listening to the webinar via a conference service. If you are disconnected, repeat the steps that were given to you by the GoToMeeting email. In order to reduce background noise, please be aware that all participant lines are muted throughout the webinar until the Q&A section at the end of each presentation. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, you may type them in the chat box and the presenter will respond to the questions as they become available. Please note that today's program is being recorded. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenters. We'll have Ms. Lindsay Garone, Mr. Peter Holman, Mr. Dan Cannon, and Mr. Jay Fredkin. First off, Ms. Lindsay Garone is responsible for KBIM's marketing and communications efforts. She is working closely with Jay to implement a comprehensive program to enhance KBIM's brand awareness, promote the Competency Manager software, and foster relationships with consultants for partnership opportunities. Lindsay is a recent graduate of the University of Massachusetts Amherst with a BA in communication. Next, we will have Mr. Peter Holtman. Peter has a science degree in chemistry and had worked in the laboratory, research, and chemical and food industries for 10 years before moving into personal competence, human capital, and personnel credentialing. Having spent 12 years as the president and CEO of the world's largest personnel certification body, Peter contributed to international standards in the United National Regulatory Committees, global certification and association boards, and numerous working groups concerned with the improvement of world trade delivered by competent personnel. He has presented his views on the future of human capital at conferences around the world and many thought pieces to journals and his own social media sites. Today, Peter consults to boards, organizations, and associations on business continuity, organizational psychology, leadership and human capital development. He runs his own executive coaching and consulting firm and is providing personnel credentialing advice and support services to associations and organizations working toward outstanding leadership practices. Following Peter, we will have Mr. Dan Cannon. Dan provides management system support to organizations seeking to improve effectiveness and quality, strategy development, and lean. He is an expert in achieving management system certifications to ISO 9001:2015, AS 9100, accreditation to ISO IEC 17025, as well as many other industry standards, and maintains close relationships with several certification and accreditation bodies. Dan has extensive leadership experience serving in world-class quality roles. In 11 years on the senior leadership team of National Technical Systems, Dan developed and led NTS's Enterprise Quality Management System in Regulatory Affairs. At Raytheon, he developed, staffed, and deployed the Mission Assurance Internal Audit Program across the Integrated Defense Systems business unit. Dan holds a BS degree in mechanical engineering from the University of New Hampshire. He also holds a Six Sigma Specialist certification from Raytheon Kaplan Norton Balance Scorecard certification and was previously an AS 9100 aerospace industry experienced auditor. Last but not least, we will have Mr. Jay Fredkin. Jay will present. Lastly, Jay provides strategic direction while also directing the day-to-day business activities at KBIM. He is active in solution design and delivery with an emphasis on aligning the interests of KBIM and its customers. Jay is directly responsible for the design and implementation of the Competency Manager software solution. Jay has 30-plus years of experience in leading results-driven high-technology businesses. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Lindsay, Peter, Dan, and Jay.
Hi everyone, this is Lindsay. I just wanted to say that we at KBIM are really excited to have this opportunity to talk about a subject that's been a major concentration of our business for the past few years. We've spent a lot of time researching and studying the concepts of competency and competency management to understand the challenges that these ideas present in a more detailed way. Throughout the process, we've talked to experts in various markets, from automotive and aerospace to medical, military, commercial, and education. And we did that to gain a greater insight into the needs and complexities of these fields. We've also talked to people from various responsibilities in business, including operations, sales, quality, EH&S, and HR, to understand their needs and how embracing competency management could enhance their programs. After speaking with hundreds of experts involved in the daily process of management, we came to two conclusions. One, every business does it, whether they realize it or not. And two, that there is a need for a business-wide common infrastructure to manage competency effectively. We're also happy to be presenting with Peter and Dan today, as their perspectives have been very influential throughout the thinking process and development of our Competency Manager software. Thank you.
Okay, over to me. Hello everyone, I'm Peter Holtman and I'm joining you from Dubai today, of all countries. I get around the world a fair bit, and just so happens today that Dubai is my resting place. Today I'm going to talk to you a bit about competency management versus just competency and what the differences are in that process. And in order to do that, let's first talk about what competency is really about. And competency is generally described as the demonstration of acquired skills against an expected outcome. So what are you actually doing against a job function, a part of a job function, a task, etc. And so who really defines those outcomes? Well, it can be many and varied. It can be an employer, an association, regulators, etc. And why we actually sit around and talk about competencies instead of qualifications is we want to actually know that the person can do the job. That's what it's really about. And it's not about, okay, I've attained knowledge in a process, but can I actually do the process now once I've actually been taught that knowledge? And that's really the difference between qualification and competency. And the reason that becomes important is competency determines the performance criteria or the outcomes for roles which are linked with financial outcomes, which are linked with quality outcomes, and especially are linked with safety outcomes. So the language that we use around the world and in various committees like at ISO, IEC, the United Nations, those sorts of places is what can the person demonstrate in order to achieve the desired outcome? How do we attain competency, or what we call skill acquisition? These days the predominant methods are around training courses, on-the-job training or OTJ, work experience, but these come with limitations at the end of the day. There can be a lack of access to the role for experiential learning. The training without the role provides a psychological barrier to success. So what we're saying here is, for instance, some industries, you can't get into the role unless you've had some experience. You can't get the experience unless you've actually been into the role. I've heard that in all too many places around the world in various jobs. So that immediately creates a barrier to people wanting to work in that space. Accessing mentors or work experience can be difficult for perceptual reasons more than anything. You know, if I train you, you're going to take my job away. You're going to start muscling in on my customers. That's a common argument we hear. You have no experience to work safely on the site, or our IP is going to be lost if I bring in someone from outside. Some of the other issues relate to management of stress or other psychological effects, which is too many people are actually watching the role occur, which can be distracting. None of those are particularly valid arguments. I mean, you know, there are some arguments there that might be relevant, but they shouldn't be a barrier to the acquisition of skill and knowledge along the way. Learning from a supporting colleague is a common practice, but it may not be developing skills entirely. In other words, the person you're learning from might actually teach you more about shortcuts or the habit-forming practices rather than what's the documented practice, which can overlook some of the risks of performance. And that depends on the person's risk appetite, which is, hey, it's okay to smoke while filling up cars at a gas station. You see those things on TV all the time, all those crazy videos show. Well, people have different risk tolerances, and exactly the same thing can happen in the workplace. The future of skill acquisition is more about managing competence development. So this is identifying the knowledge, the skills, and the attributes required, assessing the risks of performance, and assess the current workforce competence levels. We recognise that knowledge and attributes can be attained from multiple sources, such as group work, self-paced learning, research projects, and social engagements and mentorings, which is a departure from some of the more traditional models, which is classroom-based environments. You can accept that demonstration of competence can be through a portfolio of approaches these days. And what we're talking about here is how do people actually gain knowledge or attributes based on the role. And so you can have things such as competitions, social media, problem-solving assessments, decision-making, all manner of things that actually help develop the practical application of the knowledge and help develop the personal attributes along the way. We can modify current practices to future needs, and this is where it's really important. This is how do we engage the millennials and beyond, and events such as hacks and hackathons, millennial workshops, senior school programs, future state think tanks, and youth programs are all ways of starting to induct people into the future role and start to help them acquire the skills that are necessary. So this is where the future of competency is really heading. We're moving away from classroom-based environments. It's heavy on theory with a multiple choice exam at the end, but you then go onto a work site and start to apply it with some supervision. You have a skill assessment done, and then all of a sudden you're now a recognised competent professional. Well, that's old school thinking. We're now looking for new ways of applying competency and developing competency in the workforce. So what are some of the ways of thinking about this? This model has been around for quite some time. It's the Dreyfus model. It's been used in the education sectors, in the nursing sector, in the legal profession, and more commonly these days it's turning up in trade-based jobs or skill sets, so industrial technology areas using this formula. And what it really talks about is that there are differing and growing levels of skill acquisition based on not just knowledge but also the attributes. So if we look at this as an X and a Y axis, the X axis there, as it moves from left to right, talks about the level of knowledge that's actually been attained. And here we're talking about some novice, which means you've had some exposure. You might have heard about it from a friend, saw it on TV, maybe read an article on it, and you progress through in terms of how much knowledge you've acquired all the way up to expert level. And on the Y-axis, this is actually about taking responsibility for the role or the personal attributes required to competently perform the role, because you can't perform a role without having the right attributes to do it. And this talks about work habit, about maintaining a safe environment, and about making positive contribution to the role and the employer. And so here we're talking about just obliging the rules at the novice level, right up to ensuring the safety, the harmony, or the natural progression and the rewards given by other people at the expert level. So this is a different way of looking at competency, rather than saying, I've had 15 hours of training, I've done 25 days worth of work experience, and I've turned up with a paper-based degree. This model is a different way of approaching the assessment of competencies on site. So what does that look like under a credential management system? Well, here's a more practical explanation of it. So we can essentially take someone on site based on our own needs and either take them at no training level or with some experience, so we could take them in at the proficient level. And the goal is to keep progressing these people up through to an expert level and beyond, because people have an innate want to succeed and to be recognised, so people will continually move toward the higher grade of recognition and certification. And on the attribute scale, you see this is about someone who has a want to be trained and a want and an interest in the role, right up to someone who wants to mentor, educate, develop and deliver the next competent person beyond them. So this is what we're calling the pathways model, or a competency management model. How do we do assessment around this? Well, we can say at the novice level, no real assessment is required. It's more just recognition of the individual. And then we move up through some other different methods. So we've got examinations or recognition programs. We can take knowledge through problem solving. So here we're starting to introduce different sets of requirements. It's not just the regurgitation of knowledge and the practical demonstration of a task. We're now talking about things like problem solving and decision making. And as we move up into the master level, these things become more about the contribution or the return that these people are making to industry. So you can see that with the skills and also with the attributes, from very little knowledge or assessment right up to peer review and more complicated or complex methods of assessment. How does that play out in real life? Well, let's meet Sally here. Sally holds a bachelor's degree in microbiology, has 2 semesters of food safety, for instance, worked in the food laboratory for 5 years as a lab manager, and then was at one time appointed to the internal audit team. And in order to help satisfy that job, she completed a 6-week self-paced online auditing course and now wants to become recognised in her craft of auditing for the factory. So how does this practically play out? Well, Sally has some knowledge competency in auditing, which is the light blue box. She has some competency based around what it's like to work in a team, but that's still a developing trait, set of traits for her. She might be proficient in auditing, so because she's had 1 year of experience auditing, but that wouldn't make her an expert in the decision-making process and the mentoring of other people around her, so she's got some learning to do there. But she is an expert in microbiology, and she does have a lot of experience in management and leadership, so she may not need as much development in that space. So one person can have multiple levels of competence based on discrete requirements or criteria versus trying to shoehorn an individual into one of these boxes at the end of the day. This is a career management process now. So if we look at Sally's career progress, or what's important to her at the moment, in the today box she's classified overall as a proficient person, but her ambition is to become a master. So what we do is we help her track towards that, and that we've made an assessment here and says that it will take her 5 years to reach master level. So the opportunity to work with Sally is to take her from the today rating of proficient all the way up to mastery level, and that's competency management, and that's a pathway of career development. This, if you look at modern HR practices out there, is the future model of how we work with people to develop careers and to track performance in the workplace. So what's the benefit of doing all this? Well, you end up with a bigger pool of potential starters to the business, because you don't just have to take someone at a particular level. You can, depending on what you're looking for and depending on the attributes or the requirements, you can take someone at discrete levels, apply them into a competency management profile and develop them up, and be well aware of the risks that you're taking on board. You can have a greater membership audience because you're now opening it up to other levels of competence, like we said, from novice all the way up to master and the grades in between. But most importantly, you're creating an engaging pathway for a career. If people can see that there's a transparent model ahead of them, that the timing can be judged, and that they have an active contribution in determining the time frame to progress along that career pathway, and that there's some recognition or milestones along the way for recognition as well. For the employer, what's great about this is that you're not buying in the risks into your organisation or your association. It's no different to buying non-conforming product and bringing it onto site and trying to figure out how to engineer the problem out of the process once you've got it on site. Human capital is no different to that. Rather than having to employ based on very little intel or data on that person, you can actually do a lot more assessment before they walk through the front door and have a mitigated risk once they're on site. So how do these processes normally form? Well, you build a pathway here by understanding that we only are the caretakers of current practice. We don't own it, but we're here to develop it into the future to make it a better process so that the next generation can build upon it. And that means working closely with millennials and beyond to set up processes that keep them engaged in the professions that we choose to support, and by building career paths that are accessible to them and that also still deliver the result. So this is the presentation I've allotted for competency management. I hope that's been informative for you, and at the end of this I'm happy to take questions. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Peter? Okay. If there are no questions, I will turn it over to Mr. Kamen.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Thanks, Peter. My expertise is really around regulatory and compliance and the requirements associated with various aspects of business. So I'm going to spend my time talking to you about what you have to do to stay in compliance. And I'm going to focus in on a few of the management system standards. We could delve into some of the OSHA requirements in terms of competence. Those are fairly tactical, but for purposes of this, I'm sticking to some of the management system standards that have really gone from being differentiators in business to being prerequisites. You really can't get to the table anymore without having the right certifications or accreditations for your business. And I think for purposes of this audience, I'm going to show some of the standards that are relevant here and then delve down into a couple of them. You can see there's a whole pile. There's a standard for just about everything that you could possibly be involved in. Two of the most familiar are the two that I've highlighted, ISO 9001, which is the general requirements for management systems, and ISO/IEC 17025, which is competence requirements for laboratories. The word competence is right in the title of the standard. The others in the 17.0 family that you see there follow a very similar format. The competency requirements are somewhat similar as you go from standard to standard. Likewise, those listed below ISO 9001 for the various industries really build upon ISO 9001. So at the core, there's similarity. The other thing that's interesting about these standards and the time that we're in right now is, as you can see, there's a 2015 revision to ISO 9001. We're in a transition period right now up until September of next year, where companies are having to move from the previous version to this version. And there are some new requirements in there that do impact competency. And likewise, 17025 is in the process of revision. And there's some new requirements there as well. So I'm going to touch on the existing requirements and talk about where these standards are going with respect to competence. Starting off with ISO 9001, I'm not going to read all the requirements, but I've taken excerpts from the relevant portions of the standard here, and I want to highlight the requirements in blue. What I have here is the 2015 version of ISO 9001. So if we start off with the first requirement for competence, used to focus on what affects conformity of product. But now one of the nuances is that affects the performance and the effectiveness of the quality management system. So that really opens up competence to support processes, technical, anything that impacts the way you run your business and run your management system. And that, to a degree, that's up to you to define, but it is more broadly stated than just focusing on product conformity, which is the way that the previous version focused on that. The other aspects I wanted to point out is that a lot of companies stay very focused on training records or delivery of training, but competence, as Peter touched on, is also made up of education, experience, skills, not just the things that organizations teach their employees. You could home grow somebody from entry level, and they can have all of their experience gained through training and on-the-job training with your company. And you can have somebody just as qualified or just as competent based on having education or experience outside the company. And a 20-year employee next to the guy that started yesterday can be doing exactly the same jobs and tasks and be equally competent. The other requirements that come into play here is organizations are required to evaluate the effectiveness of actions taken. So whether it's training or courses or looking at, I guess, as Peter talked about, elevating people through the different levels of competence. You want to be able to measure that that's happening effectively. And then probably the biggest requirement in this area that everybody is familiar with is the requirement to retain records as evidence of competence. Okay, another new requirement, brand new section, although some of this is certainly implied previously, but new section in ISO 9001, the 2015 version, is this concept of organizational knowledge. And you can see some of the concepts here, may sound like the same sort of thing: training people, bringing the knowledge to run the business, to deliver the product. But what we're really talking about here is beyond training and elevating competence to even, probably bordering on succession planning. It's not inclusive of succession planning. So this concept of organizational knowledge is really keying in maybe on things that are generally gained through experience, so more leaning towards the experience side than the training side. An example of a company that I was at last week did a design and engineering of microwave components, waveguide technology, and the like. And their VP of engineering was still their primary designer for major designs. And so part of the discussion was, what are they doing to help that person be a master and to mentor the other folks in the organization so that you start to elevate them as experts, because the folks that had all the organizational knowledge with regards to design were really considering their exit strategy in terms of retirement and whatnot, and there wasn't a lot that had been done yet to bring those people along. So that's really what the concept of organizational knowledge is keying in on: capturing and sharing undocumented knowledge and experience. And it, again, talks about not just the internal sharing of knowledge, but what can you get from external sources, academia, conferences, gathering knowledge from other external sources. Moving over to ISO 17025, the key requirements here, and as I said, I think this audience is probably fairly familiar with them, but we'll talk about some of the requirements that are changing in the draft of the new version of 17025. So again, education, training, experience, and skills are all concepts that are part of competence. They're all part of what make people qualified to do what they do for your company. It's inclusive of temporary and contract employees. So if you have outside folks that are not employees, you still have to retain similar records in terms of their ability to do the activities, especially the technical activities that they're involved in for your organization. Some of the standards go even beyond that, talking 17065. If you're outsourcing some of the activities like some of the inspection of suppliers and things like that, you have to have the justification of competence for the folks that are doing the subcontract activities, some contracted activities for you as well. There's a couple of notes in there. One basically that says in so many words that where personal certifications are required, you shall have them. So there's auditing certifications. There's I know this EMC certifications through INRD and things like that pertain here. Personnel performing or responsible for offering opinions and interpretations, all additional requirements on top of the basic training requirements. In terms of they have to be knowledgeable in the technology of the products involved. There's requirements management shall formulate goals, essentially for competency, as summarized there. Effectiveness, again, shall be evaluated. And the existing version of 17025 talks about job descriptions being required. And it does talk about managerial and key support personnel as well as technical. And so similar to ISO 9000, it's expanded beyond just the product. It's really everything that's involved with the effectiveness of your organization, your management system. And then the new version, they're changing that to instead of specifically requiring job descriptions, it's going to focus on communicating to each person their duties, responsibilities, and authorities. So possibly a little more flexibility there with the new requirements, but the same intent is there that's accomplished with job descriptions. It just gives you a little more flexibility in how you approach that. And then I'm going to come back to, well, really both standards, but we're going to focus on the requirements in the 2015 version of ISO 9001 here when it comes to risks and opportunities. There's nothing specific here to competence, but certainly addressing risks and opportunities within the organization. Competency risk is absolutely an aspect of this. And the actions to address risks and opportunities can be addressed by taking actions to increase competency. So it has a place on both sides of it. And again, I'm not going to read the requirements here, but it does get into tying in the strategic direction of your organization and the needs and expectations of interested parties and stakeholders, and starting to work towards a risk management concept. Certainly how you manage your personnel, their skills, their competency is a part of the risk management process. So we focused on the text here of the ISO 9000 standard, but as you see below, there's similar requirements. The CASCO committee that's developing the draft for the new version of 17025 is very much focused on incorporating the same risk and opportunity concepts that are in ISO 9001. So that is going to be something new for the 17025 accredited folks. And so I thought I'd finish off with audit expectations of accreditation bodies and certification bodies. So whatever those agencies are that come in and evaluate you and provide you your certificate, these are typically the things that you can expect them to see where the rubber meets the road in terms of the requirements. Some examples of what what they expect you to have in place to show evidence that you're doing these things. Documentation of the required competency for activities affecting the quality and results. So, again, that might be job descriptions, but what are people supposed to know how to do? And then I guess we skip over to the third bullet, evidence that the people do have those qualifications and competencies. And that includes on-the-job training, includes experience and education. And again, evidence means the records associated with it. Certificates, degrees, resumes, training records. There's quite a bit to juggle there. If I jump back up to the second bullet, for again the accredited folks, the policies of most of the accreditation bodies are explicitly asking you for a matrix that gets down to individual names of employees, individual things that you perform within the scope of your business, down to specific methods showing who's qualified and capable to do which activities. So to back up that matrix, again, we're back to the evidence, on-the-job training, experience, education, training courses, outside conferences, and maintaining that proficiency to back up the things you say that they're qualified to do on your matrix. Evidence of goals for competency. We saw that was in the requirements. That's the question you asked. How do you set goals? How do you evaluate training needs within the organization? How do you ensure that individuals are continuing to elevate to meet the requirements that and keep up their proficiency as the standards and methods and technology within your organization changes. Again, this new concept of risks and actions related to risk, where there is risk to competency, or where that the actions to address risk involve training and getting additional competency. And then lastly, how organizational knowledge is addressed. So again, organizational knowledge, in a nutshell, thinking that is somewhere on the spectrum between training records at the low end and succession planning on the high end. And that's it for my section. I guess I'll flip it back to Jessica to see if there's any questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Dan? Any questions? Okay, if there are no questions, I will go ahead and turn the presentation over to Mr. Fredkin.
Can everybody see my screen okay?
We can.
Okay, so thank you for the opportunity. I'm excited to talk about an enterprise approach to competency management. We spent a lot of time thinking through this problem, and both of the speakers were very influential on me. Dan was talking about the matrices, and I think it might have been in 2010, he and I met at NTS where we were looking at the matrix. And since then, my perspective has really changed a lot on what competency management means. Peter was a big influence with his pathways model. So what I'm going to talk about today is a pragmatic approach to competency management. So I have my warning screen. I do build software that does this, and it's made us think about things at a very granular level, but I'm going to keep it top line today. And if there are any questions on any of the concepts or you want to dive deeper into them, I'm happy to take those questions. What we've learned is an employee and an enterprise perspective are both required for a successful program. And as Lindsay said, as we studied this problem, we found it's very fragmented in the way it's managed across all industries. And one of the conclusions we've come to is you need a common infrastructure for competency management. All right, I won't talk about my software tool. Why do you want competency management? Well, there are different drivers. One is If you do it effectively, you have a better workforce. And anybody, especially in the service industry, but in the manufacturing, the more skilled and competent your workforce is, the better product you deliver. As Dan talked about, sometimes you have regulatory requirements or legal requirements, or there are drivers where you have to manage competency. The other thing that I would like to be clear on, it's a business problem. What we learned as we did our research is, especially in HR, environmental health and safety and quality, and even subject matter experts, they had a lot of responsibility, but not enough authority to really get the problem addressed. And so we think visibility and making it a business problem at large is a step in the right direction. So how to implement a program? Well, the first thing is you have to commit to it. And everybody has a program. Lindsay alluded to that. Everybody does some level of competency management. The word may be defined differently. Some people call it training. But everybody has a program, whether it's documented or it's informal. It's very important to be able to identify the roles and the competence required to fulfill that role, and as Peter says, to get a desired outcome. And this is a tricky thing to do. I would say very few companies do this effectively. They identify elements of a competency, but the real competencies address not just skills and not just qualifications or knowledge, but even behaviors. So to address competencies comprehensively gives you an institutionalized program. Once you know what your competencies are, you need to know how you're going to demonstrate them, and you need to know the information that's part of that competency. So the content and the techniques are very important to a good competency program. You need to have people who have expertise in your organization that manage those competencies. You know, Peter alluded to it in his models, the master, but every organization has varying levels of degrees and skills, and I think to identify the best in your organization is a good thing because that you help to leverage that knowledge across your organization. You do need to measure and report it. As we all know, what's measured, reported gets looked at, but that's back to committing to the program. People see that you're measuring and reporting so they know you're committed to it. Employees are important, and that's one of my biggest revelations from where I started. I started with a bigger enterprise perspective, and I realized if the employees aren't in the deal, if they're not incentivized, if they don't believe in it, it just doesn't work. So they have to be a very important stakeholder in the success of the program. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. And then the other thing is we found a lot of problems with just the continuity of programs, even the better programs we saw across the different functional areas of the business. And we think tools, software, processes are an important aspect to ensuring that you have a program and to create that objective documentation Dan talked about. So to have a successful program, it needs to be your program. Everybody has a unique offering in their business. They do something that's different, and I think to have that program reflect the uniqueness of your business is an important thing. It does need to be formalized, and part of formalizing a program lets you get back to this iteration, because change and improvement come with iteration, and if it's not formalized, you're iterating off of an informal approach. Certainly in our business, and we need to do all these things better, and this has opened our eyes, we train our developers very informally in the old days. And they were subject to different type of training programs, different information. We're in the process of formalizing that training program so we know what they've received, and when we figure out how to do it better, we build that into the program. So our program grows. You also need visibility across your entire organization. This is another fall through. Subject matter expert might be the expert on a particular competency, but they're managed by somebody else. And everybody that's a stakeholder in the success of that employee should have access to that information, including the employee. And we believe the employee should see everything about themselves everybody else does. There's no hidden information. It's full transparency of information. A good program also is integrated with your work processes, meaning it's part of how you do your work. And there are ways to do that. We can talk about that after this call. Certainly, software that's intrinsic with some of your work processes helps manage that. And again, management has to commit and they have to participate, and the employees have to believe in the program. So why does an enterprise want to do this? Well, first of all, it's a proactive way for workforce development. You actually manage it in a logical way instead of in an informal way de facto. So what we learned is there is and quite frankly, I haven't seen one company that has a comprehensive common architecture that ties together the business model and all the various subject matter experts from quality to environmental health and safety to HR to management. We think that's coming. And it's not hard to do. It's a way of thinking. Small businesses with a program like this now can institutionalize their knowledge. Instead of having it in one person's head or so, they can start to grab that information and to institutionalize it. This allows large businesses to leverage this information in a very efficient manner. One of the most obvious ways to see this is during acquisitions. You see a large business hire another business because they do something very similar. But their techniques are different, their nomenclature is different, they call the jobs different. And just standardizing the nomenclature and the positions goes a long way to normalizing that acquisition. The other thing I talked about a little bit earlier is progress often happens through iteration, and it's hard to iterate informally. So when you have a program and you manage it at enterprise level, it's part of your continuous improvement process. So managers get a better workforce. It's easier for them to grow because they have a program that they can leverage for their workforce. Employees have a sense for what they're supposed to know and what they're supposed to do. It does a better job there, so they're more satisfied. You can embrace regulation requirements. All of us in the management world worry about the risk and not meeting regulated requirements and knowing we meet them. We often talk about the cranes here with the OSHA training. The last thing you want is a crane going down and to find out your crane operator was not trained or his training had lapsed. And then the other thing that allows is objective data on an employee competency, because you've now put a documented system with expectations and outcomes in place so you can see and measure that employee against that. It takes some of the subjectivity out of the process. So for employees, and as I mentioned earlier, this is one of my biggest changes, and Peter talked about something that was very subtle in my mind, how it comes across, but he talks about a pathway to success where you're not looking at just the role they're doing today and are they competent today, but you're looking at a program to get them better and better and better over time, including you could chart out a 7-year program. He talked about the distinctions between competency elements. We built a tool for the music industry where they teach students music, and it thinks the same way Peter was talking about, where you might be able to play an instrument, but you can't read music, so your proficiencies are at different levels, and how do you normalize those proficiencies? Employees also get to know what's expected from them because it's now documented. Millennials, we understand, are very key on seeing where they stand amongst their peers. You can provide objective documentation about that. And there's a whole new upbringing of incenting and inspires employees, award systems, point systems, fulfillment models. One of our customers has T-shirts and prizes that they provide to their customers as they hit certain plateaus of points. So we talked about demonstrating competency should be part of the business. There's nothing here, I bet, that's new to anybody. But a competency program embraces all the different things that people do, not just training, but all the different things they do and where they come from experientially and from an education as their overall competency. And the program that is designed by each company that's unique to their needs should embrace all the various areas that make this person proficient. Right? And the last slide I have is tools and methods. I think it's not managed well, and that's quite frankly why we're building a software product to manage this process. If you look at the tools that are used today, it's some level people still use just files and documents, and the problem with files and documents is access to them, what's in there, how often are they kept up. They can certainly work. Spreadsheets are used pretty extensively in matrices, in competency matrices, as Dan talked about. HR programs talk about elements of it, especially the performance management side. Enterprises manage some of it, and LMSs manage some of it. But we think it's part of a fragmented approach, and there needs to be a common architecture that pulls all this information together so the information is continuous across the competency of the complete individual. And that's how we built our tool to manage that process. Jessica, that is my presentation.
Okay, thank you for your presentation, everyone. Does anyone have any questions for any of our presenters? No questions? Okay, well, thank you all for your participation today, and we will look forward to all joining us for our next ACIL webinar. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.